Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you to Alia and the rest of the PSSA for having me. I will keep the presentation part quick because I know, Cole, what's up? Because I know if anyone has questions, I do have to run out of here right at 6, but if anyone has any other questions, you feel free to shoot me an email. Just a little bit about me. My name's Christian. I'm a second year. I study international development, econ, and social entrepreneurship. But I have taken poli-sci classes as part of my international development major. And then I also write plenty of papers for IDS as well. So nice to meet you all. Just a quick overview. These are like the 7 steps that I'm going to be going through in the presentation today. And these are the 7 steps that I normally go through when I'm writing an essay. So I guess we will start. First of all, the first thing you want to do is just identify the type of essay. So there are a lot of different types of essays in poly classes and in other classes. You have like your research papers, which are typically a little bit longer and are more like stat heavy. Argumentative essays, which are like the classic ones. Op-eds, short answers, and then any sort of like non-traditional style, which are like your features, your book reports, the more like creative ones. When you identify the type of essay, it helps you a lot because then you can kind of change your tone depending on the type of essay. Obviously, for like argumentative essays and research papers, like a clear thesis is going to be the most important thing, but like taking a nuanced stand is okay. And then for like something like an op-ed or like a feature article, that's where you can really be a bit more argumentative and like, you know, say your own opinion with a little bit less like tact, I suppose. The rough outline is always my first step when I write an essay. When I say rough, I mean like really rough because I only spend like 10 minutes tops doing an outline. And then I have friends that will spend like 3 days doing an outline and then they have an essay done. But I just go through my outline really quick and then start writing. So the first thing, introduction. You want to just have a little bit of background information, lay out like the main players that you're going to be talking about, the time and space, like just give the context of whatever the topic is. And then just say like why this topic is important. Then obviously you're going to have your thesis, which we're going to go over after. For your body paragraphs, I always just like lump them all together and then break it up into like the paragraph sections. So for every paragraph, you have like your main point, which is, you know, your claim for that paragraph, what it's going to accomplish and how that relates back to your thesis. Then you have for every paragraph, evidence and argument. So evidence is like your lecture material, anything you find online, statistics, data, anything that supports your thesis is what you're going to have in evidence. And then the argument is how your evidence supports your thesis. So you make the claim, you give evidence to back up the claim, and then you say how that evidence backs up your claim, which backs up your thesis. And then you do the same thing for all the body paragraphs. And then in the conclusion, you do the big picture. A lot of times it's called like the so what, now what? So like, why was the essay important? What did, like what was accomplished by reading your essay? And then like your final thoughts. It's, you know, kind of like the restate your thesis thing without actually restating your thesis. For your thesis, I think there are 4 main points that are like crucial to keep in mind. So always, number 1, before you even write the thesis, make the easier argument. I feel like there's so many times, especially, you know, your first year, it's like your first poly class, you're like, I'm going to show the prof how smart I am, and I'm going to write the harder essay on the, you know, the topic that's harder to defend. There's no reason to do that. It's just going to make your life miserable. Just always pick the easy argument. Pick the one that you find compelling. Number 2 is originality. How is your paper going to stand out from the 50 plus that your prof and TA are going to have to read? That doesn't mean that you need to have like some wild out of the box opinion. Like you don't really, that doesn't mean like have a hot take. It just means like, how is your thesis going to be, like what nuance are you finding that other people may not find? Are you just answering with a yes or no? Or are you kind of giving a little bit more, you know, I guess, leeway depending on the type of question. Clarity, your thesis isn't your whole paper, so keep it concise and clear. Don't have any evidence or argument in your thesis. This is just where you state what's going to happen in your essay and what your going to be arguing, but avoid stats and anything that will come later in your paper. And then finally, your thesis should be a roadmap. So the claims from each of your body paragraphs can kind of operate as the roadmap, like signposts in your thesis. So if you have claims, one on like, we'll see, actually, I'll just show you the examples. So on this one, it was an essay on Britain's corn laws and free trade. I kind of talk about it was my 2 body paragraphs. So one was like demonstrating that the individual level approach is the most applicable. And then the next one was saying that the alternative explanation was not better. So that's how I write it. I take the 2 claims from each of my paragraphs, or however many, and I kind of framework it like that. For this one, I have like violence is like I'll argue that violence is absolutely moral and emancipatory, and then I'll show why that's not actually the case, and then show like this one was a case study, and then I gave like a case study example of South Africa, I believe, and showing the detrimental effects that it had. Next is gathering evidence. This is pretty straightforward, especially given how easy it is to find things online. So use course materials. Don't fall into the trap of like just restating the argument from like lecture material and sources that your professor gives you. You want to have like your own creative argument, but definitely use those. Avoid using long quotes. What I like to do is kind of cut and paste quotes into whatever my argument is. So you can see here, I don't have like a full long 3-line quote. I have kind of a paraphrased version with my own ideas, and then I just quote certain words and then obviously cite those. I would say spend some time on the gathering evidence step. I always find it helpful to have like an overabundance of evidence in like my toolbox, and then pick once I'm writing the paper. So I think gathering evidence, taking some time to do that before you start writing, it makes your life a lot easier. And then obviously you're going to start writing. This is also pretty straightforward, but at some point, like you just have to start writing the paper. You are done planning, you have to just get into it. So a lot of times people face writer's block. It's something that I've always fought against. And some strategies to kind of break out of that. Don't be a perfectionist. It's not going to be perfect on your first draft through, but it's better to just have stuff on the page. Skip around. You don't have to go like intro, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, conclusion. Sometimes I like to start with a body paragraph that has the evidence that's most clear to me, and then it kind of makes my introduction a little bit easier to write. I think the earlier you start, the better. Procrastination will lead to like underdeveloped ideas and also stress, and no one likes to be up until 4 in the morning writing a paper. When in doubt, stream of consciousness writing can really help. So this is just kind of when you write down any and all ideas that come into your head. It's not polished, but it's better than having nothing on the page. After you start writing and you have like a rough draft, I always find it helpful to go back and like tweak your thesis. Because a lot of times by the time you finish writing your body paragraphs, you realize that you kind of ended up arguing something a little bit different, or at least I do that because I get a little bit distracted and like find a new idea and go down like a rabbit hole. So always make sure that you're going back to the thesis and double checking that everything that you did there was correct. The good rule of thumb is always reread the argument section and ask if the argument section is a response to your thesis. And if it's not, your evidence and argument is where your essay is. So don't try to conform evidence around your thesis. Try to conform your thesis around your evidence and argument. So make sure that those kind of align. As for revising and editing, this is probably like the part that everyone's the most used to. Obviously, you're going through checking for grammar and stuff like that. You can use online tools to do that. The stuff that you can't really use the online tools for, go beyond like grammar, syntax, and just like overall flow. It's just kind of these 3 things. So make sure the thesis responds to the prompt, the arguments respond to / support your thesis, and the evidence aligns with your arguments. If you hit those 3 things, then you're going to have a cohesive essay that does exactly what the professor wanted you to do. And that is it. I know I threw that kind of fast, but I wanted to give time for questions. So does anyone have any questions on what was presented or any other comments or things to add?
when you speak about like evidence, does it need to be statistical, or can we use like other like authors? Like if let's say a critic, so I use like let's say Thompson, I'm like Thompson argues blah 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 blah. Like would that count as evidence? Or
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's anything that's not like your own original ideas would be evidence. So any sort of ideas that can come in to strengthen your argument or offer nuance to your argument, I would put in like the evidence category.
I have
Jessica?
a few questions. This might be like a stylistical personal thing, but I noticed the second thesis you used the first person in it. Like,
Yes.
your thoughts on that?
So I am a little like I'm always a bit more casual when it comes to writing certain essays. Obviously, it depends on the type of prof and like what the essay was. So I think it's I know you're taught in like high school and before like never use first person. I use we in almost every single one of my essays. I start basically all of my body paragraphs with like, in this paragraph, we are going to explore da 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 da. So I think it depends. There's no really right or wrong answer. If it's like a super like formal essay that's like really intense or the prof is like old fashioned, I'd avoid it. But if it's more of like an op-ed or a feature or like a research paper, I think you can get away with using it if you're not using like if you're not saying like I think that da da da, da like make it professional.
Have you ever written a term paper?
A term paper? I've well like a paper over the length of a term. I've done research papers that have gone over the length of a term, but so yes. Was there a follow-up question or was it
I don't
just
know, how was that experience? How long was it?
It was pretty long. It was like 18 to 20 pages. With those, I would say good rule of thumb is like start it early. Even that doesn't mean like have an outline, start writing your paper early, but start gathering evidence early. As you do your readings every week, like jot down ideas that might fit in. Because even if you don't have an idea, it's gonna be a lot of work to go back through to the beginning of the course in like mid-March and start rereading stuff to find citations. Yes.
When you do like external secondary research, you know how there's like JSTOR, Google Scholar, there's like so many platforms. Do you have like a preference for one that like you recommend or going about that research?
I like JSTOR a lot because it's easy to cite because you just click a button. But if I'm really having trouble finding something on JSTOR, then I'll just search Google and scroll through until I find like a headline that sounds vaguely related. And then normally you can kind of find a quote in there. But JSTOR is always my first place to go. Yes.
This Sophia is really good as well. Like the McGill Library one.
Yes.
I had a question about the evidence. How would you incorporate, for example, if you have figures, or for example, you're doing kind of a game theoretical model, how would you incorporate them?
Yeah, it depends on the type of paper. If it's a paper that's like if it's for like a political economics class, you're gonna be relying more heavily on like models. You might even have like a graph in there. So for that, like the formatting guidelines, I would defer to your prof. As for like any sort of like statistics or like if it's like population data or percentages or anything along those lines, I just cite them as normal. So like I'll be like, I'll just say it, and then in parentheses, I'll just put whatever source it was that I got it from. Because most of the time those come from other academic journals. They're not just like, like you don't just like Google search it. If you do, obviously you have to cite like whatever. You can use like CBC or news stations or like whatever, is it Stats Canada that, but just make sure you're sort of citing them and keep it in the flow of the paper. Does that make sense?
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Christian, by the way.
Yes.